The millionaire's daughter was failing every single test until she overheard the janitor humming a song that somehow contained the answer to quantum physics. What happened next would make her question everything about intelligence, worth, and why the smartest person at Princeton was wearing a uniform everyone pretended not to see. Hello, my amazing family and friends. I'm so glad you're here with me again today. If you're ready to dive into another powerful story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me the country or city you're watching from. And guess what? Tomorrow, I've got another story lined up that will leave you just as captivated, so don't miss it. Now, let's get started. Brittany Ashford stared at the red ink bleeding across her calculus exam like spilled wine on white marble. Another F. The third one this month. She crumpled the paper into her designer purse, the sound sharp in the empty lecture hall where she'd chosen to receive her academic death sentence in private. Outside, autumn leaves danced against the windows of Princeton's most prestigious mathematics building, but Brittany saw only her father's disappointed face floating in the glass reflection. Richard Ashford hadn't built a tech empire worth $3 billion by accepting failure, and his only daughter's academic collapse was becoming an expensive embarrassment. Her phone buzzed. A text from her roommate. Party at Kappa House tonight. Your treat. Always her treat. Always her money. Brittany's thumb hovered over the keyboard, ready to type her usual of course, but something made her pause. Maybe it was the silence in the lecture hall, or maybe it was the crushing weight of being 20 years old and feeling utterly lost despite having everything money could provide. The sound of wheels squeaking against linoleum broke her thoughts. Through the lecture hall's open door, she glimpsed a figure pushing a cleaning cart down the hallway. The janitor moved with unhurried grace, stopping to straighten chairs that students had left scattered like afterthoughts. Brittany had seen her before. This woman who appeared each evening like clockwork, transforming chaos into order with quiet efficiency. Students barely noticed her, treating her like part of the furniture, but something about her presence had always caught Brittany's attention. Maybe it was the way she hummed softly while she worked, or how she always left the whiteboards perfectly clean, ready for tomorrow's equations that Brittany would inevitably fail to understand. The woman's name tag read Cordelia, though Brittany had never heard anyone actually use it. She was probably in her mid-50s, with silver threading through her dark hair that she kept pulled back in a neat bun. Her uniform was always pressed, her movements deliberate and purposeful. There was something almost regal about her bearing, as if she carried herself like royalty disguised as the help. What struck Brittany most was the woman's eyes. In the brief moments when their gazes had accidentally met in hallways or elevators, Brittany had glimpsed something profound there. Wisdom, maybe. Or peace. Whatever it was, it made Brittany feel exposed, as if this janitor could see straight through her designer clothes and trust fund confidence to the terrified girl beneath. 3 floors below, Cordelia Williams guided her cart around a cluster of abandoned pizza boxes near the student lounge, shaking her head at the waste. 27 years she'd been cleaning these halls, watching young minds grapple with knowledge while she kept their environment spotless. She'd seen thousands of students come and go, most of them treating her like she was invisible. But there was one girl who was different. The millionaire's daughter with the sad eyes and designer clothes. Cordelia had noticed her months ago, not because of her obvious wealth, but because of the way disappointment seemed to follow her like a shadow. The girl tried to hide it behind perfect makeup and expensive handbags, but Cordelia had raised 3 children of her own. She knew the look of someone drowning, even in shallow water. The girl's name was Brittany Ashford, though Cordelia had learned this from overheard conversations rather than any direct introduction. Students didn't introduce themselves to janitors. But Cordelia knew more about the people in these halls than they realized. She'd been cleaning up after their lives for decades, witnessing their triumphs and failures in the papers they discarded, the conversations they had assuming she couldn't hear. Brittany Ashford was failing. Badly. Cordelia had seen the crumpled tests in her wastebasket, the textbooks highlighted with the desperation of someone who was trying, but not understanding. The girl's father was some big-shot businessman who probably expected excellence as naturally as he expected his morning coffee. But excellence couldn't be bought, and Cordelia suspected that was a lesson Brittany was learning the hard way. What bothered Cordelia most wasn't the girl's academic struggles, but the isolation she sensed around her. Brittany was always surrounded by people, but there was something hollow about those relationships. They felt transactional, bought and paid for, like everything else in her world. Cordelia pushed her cart toward the mathematics building, humming an old spiritual her grandmother had taught her decades ago in rural Alabama. Wade in the water. The song had carried her through her divorce, through raising 3 kids on a janitor's salary, through her eldest son's deployment to Afghanistan. Music had a way of making the impossible seem manageable. As she entered the building, Cordelia noticed the lights still on in Lecture Hall 202. Usually the building was empty by this hour, but someone was still there. She climbed the stairs slowly, her knees reminding her of every one of her 55 years, and paused in the doorway. Brittany sat alone in the massive hall, staring at nothing, her designer purse clutched in her lap like a life preserver. The girl looked so small surrounded by all those empty seats, like a child lost in a cathedral. For a moment, their eyes met in the reflection of the darkened windows. Neither moved, neither spoke, but something passed between them in that silence, something that made Cordelia pause her cart and made Brittany's breath catch in her throat. The moment stretched like a held note in a song, full of possibility and pregnant with change. Tomorrow, Brittany would fail another test. Tomorrow, Cordelia would clean another floor. But tonight, in this quiet lecture hall, 2 very different worlds were about to collide in ways neither woman could imagine. What do you think happens when someone who has everything meets someone who has found peace with very little? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts on what these 2 women might learn from each other. The next evening, Brittany found herself in the same lecture hall, clutching another failed exam. This time it was organic chemistry, and the grade was somehow worse than her calculus disasters. She'd studied for hours, hired 3 different tutors, and even tried those meditation apps her therapist recommended. Nothing worked. Her father's latest voice message still echoed in her head. Brittany, Dean Morrison called again. We need to discuss your academic probation when I get back from Tokyo. This is unacceptable. Unacceptable. The word felt like a brand burning into her chest. She was so lost in her spiral of self-loathing that she didn't notice the soft sound of wheels approaching until they stopped just outside the lecture hall. Through the doorway, she could see Cordelia methodically wiping down the hallway bulletin boards, her movements steady and sure. Without thinking, Brittany stood up and walked to the doorway. Excuse me. Cordelia looked up, her dark eyes meeting Brittany's with gentle surprise. Up close, her face was kind but weathered, like leather that had been loved into softness. Yes, honey. The simple word honey nearly broke Brittany. When was the last time someone had called her something warm instead of her full name? I'm sorry, I don't mean to bother you while you're working, but... She held up the chemistry exam, her voice cracking. I failed again. Cordelia set down her cleaning cloth and studied Brittany's face with the same careful attention she gave to stubborn stains. What's your name, sweetheart? Brittany. Brittany Ashford. Cordelia Williams. She extended her hand, and when Brittany shook it, she noticed how steady and strong it felt. Now, why don't you tell me what's really wrong? Something about Cordelia's voice, gentle but uncompromising, opened a floodgate in Brittany's chest. I don't understand any of it. Not the chemistry, not the calculus, not even basic statistics. Everyone else gets it, but I can't. And my father, he's this genius businessman, and he expects me to be brilliant too, but I'm not. I'm just not. Tears spilled down her cheeks, carrying her carefully applied mascara with them. She waited for Cordelia to offer empty reassurances or platitudes about trying harder, the way everyone else did. Instead, Cordelia was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "May I see that test?" Brittany handed it over reluctantly. Cordelia studied it carefully, her finger tracing over the problems and Brittany's failed attempts at solutions. Her expression was thoughtful, not judgmental. "You know what I see here?" Cordelia finally said. "Complete failure?" "No, honey. I see someone trying to solve problems the way everyone else does, instead of the way her own mind works." Cordelia pointed to one of Brittany's scratchwork sections. "Look at this. You started to draw a diagram here, then erased it, and tried to do it all with formulas instead. What?" Brittany blinked. Because that's how Dr. Peterson teaches it. Formulas first. But your instinct was to draw it out, wasn't it? Well, yes, but that's childish. I'm in college. I should be able to think in abstracts." Cordelia handed the test back with a small smile. Child, I've got 3 kids of my own, all college graduates. My youngest, Marcus, he's an engineer now. You know how he learned calculus? Brittany shook her head. He built it. With his hands. Made little models out of cardboard and string until he could see how the numbers moved in space. His professors thought he was playing around, but that boy's brain needed to touch what it was learning. Cordelia leaned against her cart. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is stop trying to learn like everyone else and start learning like yourself. The words hit Brittany like a physical force. She stared at Cordelia, this woman in a janitor's uniform who had just said something more profound than anything her expensive tutors had ever offered. But I don't even know how I learn, Brittany whispered. Then maybe that's what you need to figure out first. Cordelia picked up her cleaning cloth again, but her attention remained on Brittany. You know, I clean these classrooms every night. I see what gets left behind. Most students leave trash and empty coffee cups. But you, she pointed toward Lecture Hall 202. You leave little drawings in your notebooks. Margins full of flowers and geometric patterns. Beautiful stuff. Brittany's cheeks flushed. Those are just doodles. I do them when I'm not paying attention. Or maybe, Cordelia said gently, you do them when you're paying attention in the only way that makes sense to you. The silence that followed felt different from the night before. It was charged with possibility, electric with the sudden shift in Brittany's understanding of herself. She looked down at her chemistry exam with new eyes, seeing not just her failures, but her abandoned instincts, her erased attempts to make sense of the abstract through the concrete. Mrs. Williams, she said suddenly, how do you know so much about learning? Cordelia's smile was soft and slightly sad. Honey, I've been watching young minds work in these halls for 27 years. And before that, I was putting 3 kids through school on a single income, figuring out how to help each one succeed when I couldn't afford fancy tutors or special programs. She paused, her voice dropping to something more vulnerable. Sometimes the people who can't afford the expensive solutions have to get creative. We learn to see things differently because we have to. Brittany felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening that she hadn't known was closed. Could you maybe help me? I know you're working, and I don't want to impose, but... Child, Cordelia interrupted, her voice firm but kind. Helping someone learn isn't an imposition. It's a privilege. As Cordelia resumed her cleaning and Brittany gathered her things, something fundamental had changed between them. The millionaire's daughter and the janitor were no longer strangers passing in academic hallways. They were 2 women who had recognized something essential in each other. Brittany paused at the elevator, looking back at Cordelia humming softly as she worked. Mrs. Williams. Yes, honey. Thank you for seeing something in me that I couldn't see myself. Cordelia's smile could have lit the entire hallway. That's what teachers do, sweetheart. And everyone's a teacher if they're paying attention. As the elevator doors closed, Brittany clutched her failed chemistry exam to her chest, but for the first time in months, it didn't feel like a judgment. It felt like a beginning. Brittany spent the weekend in her dorm room, staring at her chemistry textbook with Cordelia's words echoing in her mind. Stop trying to learn like everyone else. It sounded revolutionary in the quiet evening of their conversation, but in the harsh light of Monday morning, doubt crept back in like fog. Her roommate, Jessica, bounced into their shared space, designer shopping bags swinging from her arms. Britt, you missed the most amazing party at Delta Phi. Where were you? Studying, Brittany muttered, not looking up from her notes. Ugh again. Babe, you need to accept that some people just aren't academic. Your dad's loaded, you'll be fine. Why torture yourself? Jessica flopped onto her bed, pulling out a new pair of shoes that probably cost more than most people's rent. The casual dismissal stung more than Jessica probably intended. Brittany closed her textbook with more force than necessary. Maybe because I want to actually accomplish something myself for once. Okay, touchy. Jessica examined her manicure. Speaking of your dad, isn't he coming back from Japan this week? Maybe he can hire you a better tutor. I heard the Whitman's daughter got into Harvard with the right kind of help, if you know what I mean. I don't want that kind of help. Jessica shrugged. Suit yourself. But failing out of Princeton isn't exactly a great look either. After Jessica left for her sorority meeting, Brittany pulled out her phone and scrolled to her father's number. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She could tell him about Cordelia, about the new perspective on learning, about maybe trying a different approach. But she could already hear his response. Brittany, I'm paying $40,000 a year for you to get advice from the janitor? The thought made her stomach clench. What was she doing, taking academic guidance from someone who cleaned floors? Cordelia might be kind, but she wasn't exactly qualified to help someone at Princeton's level. Maybe Jessica was right. Maybe she was just grasping at straws, looking for any excuse to avoid facing the truth about her limitations. 3 floors below in the mathematics building, Cordelia was having her own moment of doubt. She'd replayed her conversation with Brittany a dozen times over the weekend, second-guessing every word. What business did she have offering advice to a student? She was a janitor, not a professor. Her supervisor, Mr. Henderson, appeared at the end of the hallway with his usual Monday morning scowl. Williams, I need to talk to you. Cordelia's stomach dropped. Henderson was old-school management, the kind of man who believed employees should be invisible and silent. Yes, sir. I heard from one of the professors that you were seen talking with students last Friday. Extended conversation in the math building. His pale eyes narrowed. You know the policy about fraternizing with students. I was just being polite, sir. The young lady seemed upset. That's not your concern. Your job is to clean, not counsel. These students pay good money to learn from qualified educators, not from. He gestured vaguely at her uniform. Well, you understand. The dismissal in his voice was practiced, effortless. Cordelia had heard it 1,000 times over the years, but today it stung differently. Maybe because she'd allowed herself to believe, for just a moment, that her experience and wisdom had value beyond what a mop and bucket could provide. Yes, sir. I understand. Good. Let's keep it professional from now on. As Henderson walked away, Cordelia gripped her cart handle tighter. She thought of her own children, all successful now, all products of her guidance and encouragement. She thought of Marcus, building calculus models in their tiny kitchen while she worked double shifts to keep him in school. She thought of her daughter Keisha, now a teacher herself, who still called her mother for advice on reaching difficult students. But this was different. This was someone else's child, someone else's world. Maybe Henderson was right. Maybe she'd overstepped. That evening, Brittany made her way to the mathematics building, telling herself she was just going to study in her usual spot. It had nothing to do with hoping to see Cordelia again. Nothing to do with the strange comfort she'd felt in that brief conversation. But when she reached the 2nd floor and heard the familiar sound of wheels on linoleum, her heart began to race. Cordelia appeared around the corner, pushing her cart with the same quiet efficiency as always. When their eyes met, Brittany saw something different there. A distance that hadn't been there before. Good evening, Miss Ashford, Cordelia said politely, but formally. The change in address hit Brittany like cold water. Gone was the warm honey and sweetheart. Gone was the gentle concern. This was the voice of someone performing professional courtesy. Mrs. Williams, I wanted to thank you again for Friday night. What you said really helped me think differently about things. Cordelia paused in her cleaning, conflict clearly visible on her face. That's kind of you to say, but I think I may have overstepped. I'm not qualified to give academic advice. You should speak with your professors or a proper tutor. The words felt rehearsed, like she was reciting a script someone else had written. Brittany's heart sank. Did I do something wrong? Did I get you in trouble? No, honey, Cordelia caught herself. No, Miss Ashford. It's just better if we keep things professional. But even as she said it, Cordelia's eyes lingered on Brittany's face, taking in the confusion and hurt there. She could see the young woman closing off, retreating back into the isolation that had drawn Cordelia to her in the first place. Of course, Brittany said quietly. I understand. I shouldn't have bothered you with my problems. She turned to go, but Cordelia's voice stopped her. Miss Ashford. Brittany turned back hopefully. For what it's worth, Cordelia said, her professional mask slipping just slightly. I meant what I said about learning differently. That part was real. Their eyes held for a moment longer than was professionally appropriate. Both women caught between what they wanted to say and what they felt they should say. Then Brittany nodded once and walked toward the elevator, leaving Cordelia alone with her doubts and her mop bucket, wondering if doing the right thing always had to feel so wrong. As the elevator doors closed, Brittany leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. For 48 hours, she'd allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was someone who saw potential in her that went beyond her father's money. But Jessica was right. Henderson was right. Even Cordelia knew it. Some people just weren't academic. And maybe it was time she accepted that truth, no matter how much it hurt. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected autumn storm that swept across Princeton's campus, with the fury of nature rejecting human schedules. By afternoon, the power had flickered out in 3 academic buildings, including the mathematics complex, where Brittany sat trapped between floors in an elevator that had shuddered to a halt between the 2nd and 3rd levels. The emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie amber glow as she pressed the call button for the 5th time, receiving only static in response. Her phone showed no signal, and the backup generator hummed ominously somewhere in the building's depths. "Hello," she called out, her voice echoing in the small metal box. "Is anyone there?" 20 minutes into her confinement, she heard voices in the stairwell. Maintenance workers, probably, or campus security checking the building. She pounded on the doors. "Help! I'm stuck in here." "Hold on. Honey, we hear you." That voice. Even through the metal doors, Brittany recognized Cordelia's warm tone, though it was followed immediately by a man's gruff instructions. "Williams, step back. This is a job for maintenance. With all due respect, Mr. Henderson, I know these old elevators better than anyone. Been riding them for 27 years. Brittany pressed her ear to the door, hearing the muffled conversation outside. "The power's out building wide," Henderson was saying. "Could be hours before we get the backup systems fully operational. Emergency services are swamped with calls from the storm. Then we need to get her out manually." Cordelia's voice was firm. "That girl could be in there all night otherwise." "That's not your concern, Williams. I've called the proper authorities." "And how long did they say it would take?" Cordelia's question was met with silence. "That's what I thought." Brittany heard footsteps retreating, then Henderson's voice fading down the hallway. "Don't do anything stupid, Williams. I'm going to check the other buildings." The silence stretched for several minutes before Cordelia's voice came through the doors, much closer now. "Miss Ashford? You okay in there, honey?" Despite everything, the familiar warmth in Cordelia's voice made Brittany's eyes water. "I'm okay, Mrs. Williams. Just scared. I know, baby. But we're going to get you out, all right? I just need to get some tools from the maintenance room." "Wait." Brittany pressed both palms against the door. "Please don't leave me alone again." The desperation in her voice must have been audible, because Cordelia's response was immediate and gentle. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. I'm right here." Brittany slid down to sit on the elevator floor, her back against the door. On the other side, she could hear Cordelia settling into a similar position. "This is all my fault," Brittany said quietly. "If I hadn't been here trying to study, if I hadn't been such a failure that I needed to hide in empty buildings." "Stop that right now." Cordelia's voice carried authority despite coming through 2 inches of steel. "You're not a failure, and you didn't cause a power outage. But if I were smarter, if I could just learn like everyone else, I wouldn't need to." "Child." Cordelia's interruption was gentle but firm. "Can I tell you something about smart?" Brittany wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "Okay. 27 years ago, I was pregnant with my 3rd baby and my husband had just walked out. Left me with 2 toddlers, no degree, and about $50 to my name." Cordelia's voice grew softer. "Everyone told me I was stupid for not going after him for support, stupid for trying to raise 3 kids alone, stupid for taking a job that barely paid minimum wage. But you weren't stupid. Some days I felt like it. Some days I felt like the dumbest woman alive, trying to help my kids with homework I barely understood myself, pretending I knew what I was doing when really I was just making it up as I went along." Brittany pressed closer to the door, hanging on every word. "But you know what I learned? Smart isn't about knowing all the answers. Smart is about asking the right questions. Smart is about paying attention to what works and what doesn't, and being brave enough to try something different when the old way isn't working." "I don't feel brave," Brittany whispered. "Honey, you came back to try again even after I hurt your feelings yesterday. You sat in this building studying even when you could have been anywhere else doing anything else. If that's not brave, I don't know what is." The silence that followed felt different from their professional distance the day before. It felt like forgiveness, like understanding, like 2 people finding their way back to each other across a divide that had seemed impossible to cross. "Mrs. Williams?" "Yes, baby. I'm sorry if I got you in trouble with your supervisor." Cordelia's laugh was rueful. "Child, I've been getting in trouble with supervisors since before you were born. Henderson's just scared that if he lets people like me actually help people like you, somebody might notice we're not so different after all. We're not different. We both want to learn. We both want to grow. We both get scared sometimes that we're not enough. Cordelia shifted against the door. Difference is, I've had 55 years to figure out that enough is a moving target, and the only person who gets to decide where it lands is you. Brittany felt something loosening in her chest, like a knot she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Would you tell me more about your kids? How you help them learn? Oh, honey. Cordelia's voice warmed with maternal pride. I thought you'd never ask. For the next 2 hours, as the storm raged outside and the emergency lights flickered intermittently, Cordelia told stories. She talked about Marcus and his cardboard calculus models, about her daughter Keisha learning to read by acting out stories, about her youngest, Devin, who couldn't sit still long enough for traditional studying until they discovered he could memorize entire textbooks if he walked while he read. Each one of my babies learned differently, Cordelia said, and each one needed me to set aside what I thought learning should look like and pay attention to what actually worked for them. That sounds like what you told me the other night. About learning like myself instead of like everyone else. Exactly. And you know what? By the time I finished helping all 3 of them through college, I realized I'd learned more about education than most people with fancy degrees. Not because I was naturally smart, but because I had to be creative. I had to pay attention. I had to care more about what worked than what looked right. The elevator suddenly lurched, and both women fell quiet. But instead of rising, it settled back into place with a mechanical sigh. Looks like we're going to be here a while longer, Cordelia said. Good, Brittany replied, surprising herself. I mean, not good that we're stuck, but good that we have more time to talk. In that case, Cordelia said, and Brittany could hear the smile in her voice. Why don't you tell me about those drawings you make in your notebook margins? The ones you think are just doodles. And for the first time in months, Brittany found herself talking about something she actually enjoyed, something that felt like her own instead of another failed attempt to be what someone else expected. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside their improvised cocoon between floors, 2 women began to build something that felt remarkably like hope. 3 hours into their elevator confinement, the emergency lighting began to dim, casting longer shadows in their metal sanctuary. Brittany had been sketching on the back of her chemistry notes, drawing geometric flowers while she told Cordelia about her secret dream of studying architectural design instead of the pre-law track her father had chosen for her. These are beautiful, honey, Cordelia said, studying the intricate patterns Brittany had slid under the elevator door gap. Look at the mathematical precision in these petals. You're seeing relationships between numbers and space that most people never notice. My father would say I'm wasting time, Brittany murmured. He thinks art is for people who can't handle real careers. Cordelia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight Brittany hadn't heard before. Can I tell you something about fathers who think they know what's best? Of course. My daddy was a brilliant man. Brilliant and angry and disappointed with a world that wouldn't let a black man in rural Alabama use his mind the way it deserved to be used. Cordelia shifted against the door, her voice growing distant. He'd been accepted to Tuskegee Institute back in 1965, full scholarship. Was going to study engineering. What happened? His father got sick. Cotton Farm went under. Daddy had to choose between his education and keeping his family from starving. The pain in Cordelia's voice was decades old, but still sharp. He chose family, like he always did. But the disappointment ate at him for the rest of his life. Brittany pressed closer to the door, sensing this story was important in ways she didn't yet understand. When I was your age, maybe a little younger, I wanted to be a teacher. Had good grades, loving heart, all the right instincts. But Daddy, Cordelia paused, choosing her words carefully. He said education was a luxury our family couldn't afford twice. Said I needed to find a man who could provide, not waste time chasing dreams that wouldn't put food on the table. Did you listen to him? I was 18 and scared, and I thought fathers always knew best. Cordelia's laugh held no humor. So, I married Robert Williams 2 weeks after high school graduation. Good man, steady job at the plant, everything Daddy said I should want. But you weren't happy. I was grateful. There's a difference. Cordelia was quiet for a moment. Robert tried to make me happy, bless him. But you can't build a life on someone else's vision of what's good for you. It'll eat you alive from the inside. Brittany thought of her father's disappointed voice on the phone, his plans for her future that never included asking what she wanted. What happened to your marriage? Lasted 15 years. Long enough to bring 3 beautiful babies into the world. Long enough for me to realize that I was disappearing a little more each day. Cordelia's voice grew stronger. The day my youngest started kindergarten, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being Cordelia and started being just Robert's wife and the children's mother. So you left? Not at first. First I started taking night classes at the community college. Just 1 or 2, telling myself it was just for fun. But Robert, he didn't understand. Said I was getting ideas above my station, that I should be satisfied with what we had. The elevator lurched slightly, reminding them both of their precarious situation, but neither woman wanted to break the spell of shared truth. The final straw came when my oldest, Marcus, brought home a report card full of C's and D's. Robert wanted to punish him, make him quit the art classes he loved. Said art was a waste of time for a black boy who needed practical skills. Cordelia's voice grew fierce. I looked at my husband trying to crush my son's spirit the same way my father had crushed mine, and something inside me just broke open. What did you do? I told Robert that if he couldn't see the value in our children's dreams, then maybe he couldn't see the value in us either. And I meant it. Cordelia took a shaky breath. He left that same night. Took his steady paycheck and his practical expectations with him. You must have been terrified. Terrified doesn't begin to cover it. I was 28 years old with 3 kids under 10, no degree, no real work experience, and a community that thought I was crazy for choosing struggle over security. Cordelia's voice grew quiet. But you know what I wasn't anymore? What? Disappearing. For the first time in my adult life, I was becoming more myself every day, even if that self was exhausted and broke most of the time. Brittany wiped tears she hadn't realized were falling. Is that why you took the job here? At Princeton. I took the job here because it paid better than anything else I was qualified for, and because I thought maybe, just maybe, being around all this learning would inspire my children to reach higher than I had. Cordelia paused. But somewhere along the way, I fell in love with this place myself. These halls full of young minds figuring out who they're going to become. The professors who spend their whole lives chasing questions that matter. Even the janitor's closet started to feel like sacred space. And your children? Did they reach higher? Cordelia's pride was audible in the darkness. Marcus is a civil engineer now. Designs bridges that connect communities. Keisha teaches 3rd grade in Newark, helping kids who look like she did learn to love reading. Devin's finishing medical school at Johns Hopkins. They all became what you couldn't. No, baby. They became what they were meant to become because I learned to get out of their way and help them find their own paths. Cordelia's voice grew gentle again. And I became what I was meant to become too, just 30 years later than I planned. A teacher, Brittany whispered. A teacher. Maybe not with a classroom or a degree on the wall, but a teacher all the same. These past 27 years, I've watched thousands of young people figure out who they are. Some of them, I've been lucky enough to help along the way. The silence that followed was full of understanding. Brittany finally spoke, her voice small but determined. Mrs. Williams? I think my father might be like your father was. And like your husband. Someone who thinks love means controlling other people's choices. What makes you think that, honey? Because I've never told him about the drawings. I've never told him that when I doodle in chemistry class, I'm actually seeing the molecular structures as 3-dimensional sculptures. I've never told him that I understand physics better when I imagine buildings that could bend with earthquake forces instead of fighting them. Brittany's voice grew stronger. I've never told him anything real about who I am because I'm terrified he'll try to fix me. And what if he does try to fix you? Brittany considered this, thinking of her father's love wrapped in expectations, of Cordelia's courage in choosing uncertainty over safety. Then maybe I'll have to be brave enough to stay broken, in all the ways that make me who I am. In the darkness between floors, Cordelia smiled. Now that, baby girl, sounds like the beginning of wisdom. By the time the maintenance crew finally restored power to the elevator at nearly midnight, something fundamental had shifted between the 2 women. As the doors slid open with a mechanical sigh, Brittany and Cordelia found themselves blinking in the harsh fluorescent lighting like miners emerging from underground depths. "Miss Ashford, thank goodness you're safe." Mr. Henderson stood in the hallway with two maintenance workers, his face flushed with the kind of panic that came from imagining lawsuits and angry phone calls from billionaire fathers. But Brittany barely acknowledged him. Her attention was fixed on Cordelia, who was gathering her cleaning supplies with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything else, despite having spent 6 hours on a hallway floor. "Mrs. Williams," Brittany said softly, and something in her tone made Henderson step back. "Would you walk with me? I know it's late, but—" Cordelia met her eyes and nodded. "Just let me put my card away, honey." Henderson cleared his throat. "Miss Ashford, perhaps you should get back to your dormitory. It's been a traumatic evening, and I'm sure your father would want—" "My father isn't here," Brittany said, her voice carrying a new steel that surprised everyone, including herself. "And I'm exactly where I need to be." 20 minutes later, they sat on a bench outside the student center, sharing a thermos of coffee that Cordelia had retrieved from the janitor's break room. The storm had passed, leaving the campus air clean and electric with possibility. Above them, stars appeared between the breaking clouds like scattered diamonds on black velvet. "I keep thinking about what you said," Brittany began, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "About your children learning differently. About helping them find their own paths. What about it? Nobody's ever helped me find my path. Everyone's just told me which road to walk." She took a sip of coffee, wincing slightly at its strength. "Even my tutors don't really teach me. They just try to make me memorize enough to pass tests." Cordelia studied her face in the soft glow of the campus lighting. "What would real teaching look like for you, do you think?" "I don't know, but I think it would start with someone actually caring whether I understood, not just whether I could repeat the right answers." Brittany set down her cup and pulled out her notebook, flipping to a page covered in her geometric doodles. "Like these patterns. I draw them when I'm thinking about molecular bonds, but I never show them to anyone because they look like children's artwork. May I?" Brittany handed over the notebook, watching nervously as Cordelia studied her drawings with the same careful attention she'd given everything else that evening. "Honey, these aren't children's artwork. These are mathematical models." Cordelia traced one of the intricate patterns with her finger. "Look at this one. You've drawn the benzene ring as a flower, but you've kept all the proportions exact. The angles, the spacing, even the way you've shown the electron clouds as petals. Really, you're visualizing chemistry in 3 dimensions, which is exactly what the best chemists do. You're just doing it with art instead of computer programs." Cordelia looked up from the notebook. "Did you know my Marcus used to draw bridges before he learned to calculate them? Said he had to see how the weight moved through the structure before the math made sense. And that actually helped him." "Helped him?" "Child, his professors at Rutgers started using his drawings as teaching tools. Turned out a lot of students learned better when they could see the concepts instead of just reading about them." Brittany felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope, maybe. Or recognition. The feeling of being seen for who she actually was instead of who she failed to be. "Mrs. Williams," she said carefully, could you help me study? Not like a tutor who just gives me answers, but like you helped Marcus and Keisha and Devin. Like someone who wants to understand how my mind actually works." Cordelia was quiet for a long moment, and Brittany's heart sank. She'd pushed too hard, asked for too much. "Baby girl," Cordelia said finally, "I would be honored." The relief that flooded through Brittany was so intense, she had to blink back tears. Really, but we're going to do this right. No hiding in empty buildings or stolen conversations in hallways." Cordelia's voice carried gentle authority. "You're going to talk to your professors, tell them you need a different approach. You're going to advocate for yourself. What if they don't listen? Then we'll make them listen. Together." Cordelia squeezed Brittany's hand. "But first, you're going to learn to trust yourself. Trust that your way of seeing the world isn't wrong. It's just different. And different can be powerful if you know how to use it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching late-night joggers pass under the streetlights and listening to the distant sound of music from the dormitories. Finally, Brittany spoke. "Can I ask you something personal? After tonight, honey, I think we're past worrying about personal. Do you ever regret it? Leaving your marriage, choosing the hard path?" Cordelia considered this, her expression thoughtful. "I regret the years I lost pretending to be someone I wasn't. I regret the example I set for my children about accepting less than you deserve. She paused. But the choice to leave? The choice to bet on myself even when it seemed impossible? Never. Not for one single day. Even when it was scary. Especially when it was scary. Because scared meant I was doing something that mattered. Safe is overrated, baby girl. Safe keeps you small. Brittany laughed, a sound of pure delight that echoed across the quiet campus. My father would have a heart attack if he heard you say that. His whole philosophy is about minimizing risk, controlling outcomes. And how's that working out for you? Terribly, Brittany admitted. I'm so afraid of failing his way that I can't succeed my own way. Then maybe it's time to disappoint him a little bit. In the best possible way. Cordelia stood up, gathering their empty coffee cups. First lesson starts tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. Meet me in the math building, lecture hall 202. Bring that chemistry test you failed, and bring these drawings. Won't you get in trouble with Mr. Henderson? Cordelia's smile was radiant and slightly rebellious. Honey, I've been getting in trouble for doing the right thing for 55 years. I'm not about to stop now. As they walked back toward the dormitories, their footsteps echoing in rhythm on the empty pathways, Brittany felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood. The excitement of learning something new, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The anticipation of discovering parts of herself she'd never known existed. Mrs. Williams? Yes, baby. Thank you. For seeing me. Really seeing me. Cordelia stopped walking and turned to face her, placing gentle hands on Brittany's shoulders. Sweetheart, you don't need to thank someone for recognizing your light. You just need to stop hiding it under a bushel. Her smile was warm enough to chase away the last of the evening's chill. Tomorrow, we start teaching you to shine. What moments in your own life have you felt truly seen and understood by someone unexpected? Share in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful teachers come from the most surprising places. For 3 weeks, their evening sessions in Lecture Hall 202 became the highlight of Brittany's academic life. Under Cordelia's patient guidance, she began to see chemistry as architectural blueprints for molecular buildings, physics as the dance of forces through structures she could sketch and manipulate. Her test scores improved from F's to C's to her first B+ in organic chemistry. But success, it turned out, brought its own dangers. Dr. Peterson noticed the change first. Miss Ashford, your recent exam showed a completely different approach to problem solving. Are you working with a new tutor? Brittany hesitated, thinking of Cordelia's gentle insistence that she learn to advocate for herself. I'm learning to visualize concepts differently, drawing them out before I solve them. Interesting. And who suggested this methodology? The question hung in the air like a trap. Brittany knew she should be proud of her progress, should give credit where it was due. But the weight of Princeton's academic hierarchy pressed down on her. I figured it out myself, she said quietly, hating the taste of the lie. What she didn't see was Mr. Henderson standing just outside the classroom door, having come to complain to Dr. Peterson about maintenance scheduling. What she didn't hear was his sharp intake of breath as he recognized the implications of her improved performance. That evening, Brittany arrived at their usual meeting spot to find Cordelia already there, but something was wrong. The older woman's face was tight, with an emotion Brittany had never seen before. Anger, maybe. Or disappointment. Mrs. Williams? Is everything okay? Sit down, Brittany. The formal use of her full name sent ice through Brittany's veins. What's wrong? Mr. Henderson called me into his office today. Cordelia's voice was carefully controlled. Seems there's been some concern about my extracurricular activities. Brittany's stomach dropped. What kind of concern? The kind where parents pay $40,000 a year and expect their children to receive instruction from qualified faculty, not from the cleaning staff. Cordelia's eyes were hard in a way Brittany had never seen. The kind where university administrators worry about liability when unqualified personnel provide academic advice. But you're not unqualified. You've helped 3 children graduate college. You understand learning better than any professor I've ever had. According to Princeton University, I'm very qualified to clean toilets and empty trash cans. Beyond that, I'm a liability waiting to happen. The bitterness in Cordelia's voice cut through Brittany like a blade. What did you tell them? I told them I was just being friendly, making conversation with a student who seemed upset. Cordelia stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. I told them it wouldn't happen again. You lied. Cordelia whirled around, and for the first time since they'd met, Brittany saw real anger flashing in her eyes. I protected my job, Brittany. The job I need to keep a roof over my head and food on my table. The job I can't lose because I was foolish enough to think I could be something more than what my paycheck says I am. The words hit Brittany like physical blows. Is that what you think this was? You being foolish. I think this was me forgetting my place. Again, Cordelia's voice cracked slightly. Just like I did when I thought I could go to college while married to Robert. Just like I did when I thought I could pursue my own dreams instead of accepting what was practical. That's not the same thing at all, isn't it? Cordelia turned back to the window, her reflection ghostly in the dark glass. Here I am, 55 years old, still believing that I have something valuable to offer people who live in a completely different world than mine. Still thinking that caring about someone gives me the right to interfere in their life. You didn't interfere. You saved me. Brittany was on her feet now, her voice rising with desperation. 3 weeks ago, I was failing everything, hating myself, ready to drop out. Now I'm actually learning, actually succeeding. Because you figured it out yourself, right? Cordelia's voice was quiet, but lethal. That's what you told Dr. Peterson, according to Henderson. That you discovered your own learning style, without any help. The accusation hung between them like a chasm. Brittany's face went white as she realized the implications of her cowardice. I was scared. I didn't want to get you in trouble. Well, congratulations. You succeeded. Cordelia gathered her purse and jacket with sharp, efficient movements. I'm in trouble anyway, and you get to keep all the credit for your improvement. Win-win. Mrs. Williams, please. No. Cordelia's voice cut through her plea like winter wind. You want to know what the real difference is between us, Brittany? When my children needed me to fight for them, I did. When they needed me to stand up to people who wanted to diminish them, I did. Even when it cost me everything. Tears were streaming down Brittany's face now. I know I messed up, but you're Richard Ashford's daughter, and I'm just the help. When push came to shove, you protected yourself and threw me under the bus. Cordelia paused at the door, her hand on the handle. I thought you were different. I thought you understood what it meant to be seen and valued for who you really are. But at the first sign of pressure, you became exactly what everyone expected you to be. That's not fair. Cordelia turned back one last time, and the pain in her eyes was devastating. Fair? Honey, I've been cleaning up after privileged children for 27 years. I know exactly how fair the world is. Please don't leave. We can fix this. I'll tell Dr. Peterson the truth. I'll talk to the administration. And say what? That the janitor was giving you academic advice? That you've been meeting secretly with an employee who violated university policy? Cordelia shook her head. All that would do is get me fired faster and make you look even worse. Then what do? We do nothing. You go back to your life, and I go back to mine. You keep improving in your classes, and I keep cleaning floors. We pretend these past few weeks never happened. I don't want to pretend. I don't want to go back to who I was before. Then don't. Cordelia's voice softened slightly, but the distance remained. Be the person you discovered you could be. Just do it without me. She opened the door, then paused without looking back. For what it's worth, Brittany, you really are brilliant. You just needed to learn to trust yourself. I'm sorry I ever made you think you needed me to be complete. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Brittany alone in the lecture hall where everything had changed. She sank into one of the chairs, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her chest. Outside, Cordelia leaned against the hallway wall, her own tears falling silently as she listened to the sound of Brittany's heartbreak echoing through the door. She wanted to go back in, wanted to comfort the girl she'd come to love like her own daughter. But some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt with good intentions. She'd learned that lesson 30 years ago when she'd chosen her own path over everyone else's expectations. The cost of authenticity was often loneliness. The price of standing up for yourself was sometimes standing alone. As she walked toward the elevator, Cordelia whispered a prayer for the broken girl she was leaving behind. She prayed that Brittany would find the courage she'd failed to show today. She prayed that the light they'd uncovered together wouldn't dim in the darkness of this betrayal. But mostly, she prayed that someday, when it really mattered, Brittany would choose love over fear, even if it was too late for them. 3 days passed in a haze of guilt and isolation. Brittany sat through lectures without hearing, stared at textbooks without reading, and sketched geometric patterns that looked increasingly broken and incomplete. Her roommate Jessica noticed the change but attributed it to academic stress, offering the usual shallow solutions: shopping, parties, or calling her father for a better tutor. But Brittany couldn't call her father. Not yet, because doing so would mean admitting that Cordelia had been right about everything, especially about her cowardice. On Thursday evening, she found herself standing outside the mathematics building, watching through the windows as Cordelia moved through her cleaning routine with the same quiet efficiency as always. But even from a distance, Brittany could see the change in her posture. The gentle humming was gone. The small smiles she used to share with passing students had vanished. She moved like someone performing a job rather than someone who found meaning in her work. Brittany pressed her palm against the cold glass, remembering their first conversation in this same building. How Cordelia had seen her potential when everyone else saw only failure. How she'd offered wisdom wrapped in kindness, asking for nothing in return except the chance to help someone learn. And how Brittany had repaid that gift with betrayal. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father. Flying back from London tomorrow. We need to discuss your academic progress. Heard there's been improvement. Brittany stared at the message, her heart racing. Word had reached him about her better grades. Soon he'd want details, explanations, credit for whatever intervention had turned his failing daughter around. And she'd have to choose again between truth and self-preservation. Inside the building, Cordelia paused in her cleaning as she noticed a figure standing outside. Even through the glass, even in the darkness, she recognized Brittany's silhouette. For a moment, their eyes met through the window, and Cordelia felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. But then she remembered Henderson's warning, delivered with bureaucratic precision. One more complaint about inappropriate interaction with students, Williams, and you're terminated. No references, no severance, no second chances. Are we clear? She was clear. Crystal clear. At 55, starting over wasn't just scary, it was potentially impossible. She had 2 more years until she qualified for full Social Security, a modest savings account, and no marketable skills beyond keeping things clean. She couldn't afford to lose this job, no matter what her heart told her about the broken girl standing in the cold. Cordelia turned away from the window and resumed her cleaning, each movement deliberate and final. But her hands shook as she wiped down desks, and her eyes burned with unshed tears. Outside, Brittany watched Cordelia turn away and felt something break apart inside her chest. Not just disappointment, but recognition. She was watching someone she cared about choose fear over love, safety over authenticity, exactly the way she had chosen 3 days ago. This was what cowardice looked like from the outside. This was the cost of protecting yourself at someone else's expense. Brittany pulled out her phone and scrolled to Dr. Peterson's email address. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she composed and deleted a dozen different messages. How do you explain that the most important teacher you've ever had wears a janitor's uniform? How do you advocate for someone who can't advocate for herself without risking everything? How do you choose love when choosing love might destroy the person you're trying to protect? Finally, she typed, Dr. Peterson, I need to schedule a meeting with you and the department chair. I have something important to discuss about my recent academic improvement. It concerns proper attribution and academic integrity. She stared at the message for 10 minutes before hitting send. 2 floors above, Dr. Peterson read the email with growing concern. In his 20 years at Princeton, he'd learned to recognize the tone of a student about to confess to academic dishonesty. The timing, combined with Brittany's sudden improvement and Henderson's vague warnings about inappropriate staff interaction, painted a troubling picture. He forwarded the email to Dean Morrison with a brief note. We may have a situation with the Ashford girl. Recommend we meet first thing Monday morning. Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor to Cordelia's small apartment in Trenton. Marcus Williams stood on his mother's doorstep with 2 cups of coffee and a concerned expression that reminded her painfully of his father. Morning, Mama. Thought you might want some company. Cordelia accepted the coffee but studied her son's face with maternal suspicion. It's 8 in the morning on Saturday, Marcus. You drove 40 minutes to bring me coffee. Actually, I drove 40 minutes because Keisha called me. Said you sounded different on the phone this week. Sad different, not just tired different. Cordelia settled into her favorite armchair, the one she bought secondhand when she first moved to this apartment 27 years ago. It had witnessed her children's homework struggles, her late-night worries about making rent, her quiet celebrations of their graduations and successes. It had also witnessed her moments of deepest doubt, when she wondered if leaving Robert had been the right choice after all. There was a student, she began carefully. A young woman who was struggling. I tried to help, and it went badly. Marcus sat on the couch across from her, his engineer's mind already working through the implications. Help how? The way I helped you and your sisters. Listening to how her mind worked, suggesting different approaches to learning. Cordelia's voice grew smaller. I forgot that I'm not their mother. I forgot my place. Your place? Marcus's voice sharpened. Mama, your place is wherever someone needs wisdom and kindness. That's who you are. That's who I thought I was. But this week reminded me that I'm an employee first, and employees who step out of line get fired. What happened exactly? Cordelia told him about Brittany, about their conversations and breakthrough moments, about Henderson's warning and Brittany's denial. She told him about the look of betrayal in the girl's eyes and her own choice to walk away rather than fight. Marcus listened in silence, occasionally asking clarifying questions, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. Mama, he said finally, do you remember what you told me when I wanted to quit engineering school? When Professor Harrison said my bridge designs were too unconventional, too artistic? I told you that unconventional wasn't wrong, it was just unexpected, and that the world needed more unexpected solutions, not fewer. And what did you tell me to do? Cordelia's voice was barely a whisper. I told you to fight for your vision, to show them that different could be better. So why aren't you following your own advice? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Cordelia looked around her small apartment, at the photos of her children's graduations, at the framed thank you notes from former students she'd helped over the years, at the life she'd built by choosing courage over safety again and again. Because I'm scared, baby. I'm 55 years old and scared of starting over. Marcus reached over and took her hands. Mama, do you know what I tell people when they ask me how I learned to design bridges that nobody thought would work? She shook her head. I tell them my mother taught me that the strongest structures aren't the ones that resist change. They're the ones that bend without breaking, that find new ways to carry weight when the old ways fail. He squeezed her hands gently. You taught me that love isn't safe, Mama. Love is brave. Cordelia closed her eyes, feeling the truth of her son's words settling into her bones like warmth after a long winter. What if I lose my job? Then you'll find another one. What if you don't? And you spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you'd been brave enough to fight for something that mattered. That evening, Cordelia sat at her kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, writing and rewriting a letter she wasn't sure she'd have the courage to send. Outside her window, Trenton's streetlights flickered on one by one, and somewhere 30 miles away, a young woman was probably sitting in her dorm room, preparing for a conversation that would either save or destroy everything they'd built together. The choice was no longer about protecting their respective positions or maintaining professional boundaries. The choice was about whether love was worth the risk of loss, whether truth was worth the cost of speaking it, whether two women from different worlds could find the courage to fight for what they'd discovered in each other. Cordelia picked up her pen and began to write. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes after a storm has passed through, leaving everything sharp-edged and new. Brittany sat in Dean Morrison's office, her hands folded in her lap, watching the morning sunlight stream through windows that someone had cleaned to perfection. Probably Cordelia, she thought, and the irony wasn't lost on her. Dr. Peterson sat across from her, his expression carefully neutral, while Dean Morrison reviewed the file spread across her mahogany desk. Miss Ashford, the dean began, your email mentioned concerns about academic integrity. Given your recent improvement and certain irregularities that have come to our attention, I think it's best we address this directly. Brittany's heart hammered against her ribs. Yes, ma'am. I need to tell you the truth about how I've been learning. For the next 20 minutes, she told them everything. About her struggles with traditional learning methods, about meeting Cordelia in the elevator, about their evening sessions where she'd learned to visualize molecular structures as architectural blueprints and chemical bonds as bridges connecting elements in space. Mrs. Williams never did my homework for me, Brittany concluded, her voice gaining strength with each word. She never gave me answers or helped me cheat. She just taught me to trust the way my own mind works. She saw that I learned through visualization and helped me develop that strength instead of trying to force me into methods that don't work for me. Dr. Peterson leaned forward. Miss Ashford, while Mrs. Williams may have had good intentions, she's not qualified to provide academic instruction. University policy exists to protect students from what? Brittany interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. From someone who actually cared whether I understood the material? From someone who took time to figure out how I learned best instead of just trying to make me memorize formulas. Dean Morrison held up a hand for silence. Miss Ashford, the issue isn't Mrs. Williams' intentions. The issue is liability, proper channels, and ensuring that our students receive instruction from credentialed educators. Then maybe your credentialed educators should learn from her, Brittany said quietly. Because in 3 weeks, she taught me more about learning than I'd learned in 12 years of expensive private schools and elite tutors. The room fell silent. Dean Morrison and Dr. Peterson exchanged glances, and Brittany could practically see them calculating the political implications of her statement. Richard Ashford's donations to the university were substantial. His daughter's public criticism of their educational methods would not go over well. A soft knock interrupted the tension. Dean Morrison's secretary peered through the door. "Excuse me, Dean Morrison, but there's a Mrs. Williams here. She says she has information relevant to this meeting." Brittany's breath caught in her throat. Through the open door, she could see Cordelia standing in the outer office, wearing her best dress instead of her uniform, clutching a manila envelope with hands that trembled slightly. "Send her in," the dean said after a moment's hesitation. Cordelia entered the office with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything else, but Brittany could see the cost of her courage in the set of her shoulders, the careful control of her expression. Dean Morrison, Dr. Peterson. Cordelia nodded to each in turn. Then her eyes found Brittany's. "Miss Ashford." "Mrs. Williams," Dean Morrison said carefully. "We're in the middle of a sensitive discussion about my inappropriate involvement in Miss Ashford's education," Cordelia finished. "Yes, ma'am. That's why I'm here." She opened the manila envelope and pulled out several sheets of paper, placing them on the dean's desk with deliberate precision. "These are letters of recommendation from 3 professors at Rutgers University, where my son Marcus graduated with his engineering degree. They're recommending me for admission to their master's in educational psychology program." Cordelia's voice was steady, professional. "I've also brought documentation of my 27 years of experience here at Princeton, including examples of students I've helped informally over the years." Dr. Peterson frowned. "Mrs. Williams, while your experience is commendable, it doesn't address the policy violations." "You're right," Cordelia interrupted, her eyes never leaving the dean's face. "I did violate policy. I helped a struggling student without going through proper channels. I provided academic support without official credentials." She paused, letting the admission hang in the air. "And I'd do it again." The boldness of the statement sent a ripple of shock through the room. Dean Morrison leaned back in her chair, studying Cordelia with new interest. "Explain." 27 years ago, I took this job because I needed to feed my children. I stayed because I discovered something remarkable in these halls. Every day, I watch brilliant young minds grapple with knowledge, and I see which ones are flourishing and which ones are drowning. Cordelia's voice grew stronger. Miss Ashford was drowning, not because she lacks intelligence, but because no one had bothered to figure out how she learns best. "That's not your responsibility, Mrs. Williams," Dr. Peterson said. "Isn't it?" Cordelia turned to face him directly. "If you see someone struggling and you have the ability to help, what makes you think credentials matter more than compassion? What makes you think a degree on the wall is more important than understanding how a mind works?" She pulled out another sheet of paper. "This is a proposal. Princeton has one of the most innovative engineering programs in the country, but your student success rates in foundational courses haven't improved in 15 years. What if you had a program that identified struggling students early and paired them with mentors who specialized in alternative learning approaches?" "You're suggesting we formalize what you did with Miss Ashford?" Dean Morrison asked. "I'm suggesting you recognize that traditional teaching methods don't work for everyone, and that wisdom doesn't always come with official certification." Cordelia's eyes found Brittany's again. "Miss Ashford has learned to visualize molecular structures as 3-dimensional art. She understands chemical bonds as architectural elements. She's not failing your classes because she's not smart enough. She was failing because no one bothered to teach her in a language her mind could understand. Brittany felt tears streaming down her face. Here was Cordelia, risking everything again, but this time fighting for both of them. Fighting for the principle that learning mattered more than protocol, that seeing students as individuals was more important than following institutional rules. Mrs. Williams, Dean Morrison said slowly, "Are you familiar with our peer tutoring programs?" "Yes, ma'am." "What if we expanded that concept? What if we created a mentorship program that paired struggling students with staff members who had demonstrated success in alternative educational approaches?" The dean looked at Dr. Peterson, who was frowning but listening. "Properly supervised, of course, with appropriate training and oversight." "You're talking about legitimizing what Mrs. Williams did," Dr. Peterson said. "I'm talking about recognizing that it worked," the dean replied. "Miss Ashford's improvement has been remarkable. If we can replicate that success with other struggling students, there would need to be proper certification," Dr. Peterson insisted. "Training protocols, assessment methods, administrative oversight." Cordelia nodded. "I'd be willing to pursue whatever credentials you require. The Rutgers program I've applied to specializes in alternative learning methodologies. I could complete the degree while developing the pilot program here." "And Miss Ashford," Dean Morrison turned her attention back to Brittany. "Would you be willing to participate in documenting your learning process? Help us understand how this approach might work for other students." Brittany looked at Cordelia, saw the hope and fear mingled in her eyes, saw the courage it had taken to walk into this room and fight for something larger than both of them. "Yes," she said quietly, "but I want Mrs. Williams to be my official mentor. Not as a favor or an exception, but because she's the best teacher I've ever had." 3 hours later, Brittany found Cordelia sitting on their bench outside the student center, staring up at the autumn sky with an expression of stunned disbelief. "Did that really just happen?" Cordelia asked as Brittany settled beside her. "You just created a new program at Princeton University. You just turned rule-breaking into institutional change." Brittany laughed, the sound bright with amazement. "You just proved that love is stronger than policy." Cordelia was quiet for a long moment. "I almost didn't come. I wrote that letter a dozen times and threw it away 11 of them." "What changed your mind?" "Marcus came to see me. Reminded me that I raised him to fight for what matters, not just what's safe." Cordelia smiled. "And I realized that you matter, baby girl. What we built together matters. It was worth fighting for." "I'm sorry," Brittany said quietly, "for being a coward. For denying what you meant to me when I should have been protecting you. You weren't ready then, but you were ready today." Cordelia took her hand. "That's the thing about courage, honey. It's not about never being afraid. It's about choosing love when fear would be easier." They sat in comfortable silence, watching students hurry between classes, each carrying their own struggles and dreams and possibilities for growth. "Mrs. Williams?" "Yes, sweetheart. Thank you for teaching me the most important lesson of all." "Which one was that?" Brittany squeezed her hand. "That the best teachers don't just help you learn subjects. They help you learn who you are." 6 months later, the Ashford Williams Alternative Learning Program officially launched with 12 student mini pairs and a waiting list of faculty volunteers. Brittany's architectural visualizations of molecular structures had become teaching tools used in chemistry classes across the university. Her father, initially skeptical, had become the program's largest donor after seeing his daughter's transformation from failing student to confident learner. But the real success was smaller and more personal. It was visible in the quiet moments when struggling students found their voices, when staff members discovered they had gifts beyond their job descriptions, when two women from different worlds proved that wisdom and love could bridge any gap. In Lecture Hall 202, where everything had begun, a small plaque now hung beside the door. Learning happens when we have the courage to see each student as they truly are, not as we expect them to be. Dedicated to all the teachers who clean our floors, open our minds, and show us that knowledge comes in many forms. Brittany visited the plaque every week, running her fingers over the words and remembering the night a janitor taught a millionaire's daughter the most valuable lesson of all, that everyone deserves to be seen, understood, and loved for exactly who they are. Sometimes the greatest teachers come in the most unexpected forms. What unlikely mentor in your own life helped you see yourself differently? Share your story in the comments below and celebrate the people who saw your potential when you couldn't see it yourself.
Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this one, then you'll absolutely love the next. It's even crazier and more captivating than you can imagine. So go ahead and click the video showing right here on your screen, and I'll see you in the next story.